Migration is one of the most talked about topics in Australia today, but many people still have questions about how the system works. In this Nation's Watch interview, we speak with a registered migration agent to explore what migration looks like in Australia. Can you tell us what migration looks like in Australia today?
The net overseas migration for Australia normally comes around 300,000 each year. And when it comes to permanent migration, it always comes near to 150 to 200,000 each financial year. So it looks very promising for an international migrants, skilled or unskilled, who wanted to look into Australian migration stream, where majority of the permanent migration is supported by Australian migration visa pathways, and skilled and unskilled, some of them are dependent on industrial labor agreements or employer-sponsored visas.
What student and skill visas are good at the moment in Australia?
Yeah. For skilled workers in around the globe, you can look into Australia's skill migration. We generally categorize that into three subclasses: 189, 190, and 491. These are the visa subclasses where you can apply directly to Australia. You can't just directly apply. You need to look into the Australian skill migration list, whether your occupation is available on the list. Then you need to connect with the skill assessment body where your skills is generally equate to Australian standard. And once you have the skill assessment, you need to pass an English language exam where prescribed similar to your qualification or your occupation in Australia. Once you meet the certain point, which generally considered as 65 points is the minimum in Australian skill migration point system. And if you have the 65 points, you can meet it. You can certainly put an expression of interest to Australian state, territories, or in a direct 189 skill stream. If you get selected, then you can apply for the visa. Once it's granted, you can land in Australia as a skilled migrant with a permanent residency where you can enjoy the free medical and free education for the kids in Australia.
So where does asset migration fit in all the process? So do you do end-to-end or where does?
Yeah. As an asset migration, we do end-to-end process. We generally do a free eligibility checkup for international migrants, whether you can meet the Australian criteria for the skill migration. If you meet the skill criteria and if you're meeting the basic English language or required English language and you meet the 65 points, then we're happy to help you to start the process. It includes skill migration, supporting your English training, and submitting an expression of interest. And finally, if you get an invitation, we help you to apply the visa. So even if you come over here, we are here in Australia around 5 cities, and our branches can help you to do the initial settlement in Australia.
What are some common visa issues that applicants face?
Yeah. So even I say 65 points, you need to meet the criteria in Australia, but many occupation won't be get invitation with that 65 points. So I know like many people have a hope of getting into Australia with just 65 points. Occupation like accountants, occupation like engineering technologists or an IT professionals are not invited with 65 or 75 points in the last 1 year of round. So if you come into that occupations, then you need to have a proper strategy to get into Australia through regional migration or a state nominated 190 migration.
So when we talk about occupation visas, so how do we know that what occupations are better coming from other countries? Is there a place that they can go and look at?
You can always look into the budget of Australia and where they highlight what areas Australia have a high shortage. So generally, we have a ministerial direction always for certain positions. Like currently, it is health professionals, allied health professionals, construction industry, where Australia is facing a huge demand. So those occupations can be invited with very less points, whereas non-urgent occupations like ICT business analyst, ICT security specialist, and some of the management occupations like accounts, some of the similar occupations may not invite with that less points. You might need very high points to get invitation. So if your occupation on the critical occupation list or on a critical demand in Australia, there is a high chance you can get a faster visa grant and faster invitation to Australia.
There are some occupations you need to do a transition course or to match up to Australian standards. So
Yeah.
where does that?
Yeah. So when I say a lot of the occupation, you can easily migrate to Australia, but certain occupations are a bit harder in terms of you need to meet the quality of an Australian standard. So for example, like a dentist, a doctor, an optometrist, where sometimes your qualification matches. However, you also need to clear certain exams which Australia prescribe. For a dentist, you need to clear ADC 1 and 2. For a doctor, generally, you need to have an AMC 1 or 2 unless you meet the certain criteria, like you working in UK or a similar country for certain age, and or you completed your qualification from an English country where Australia accepted equivalent to Australian standard. So those sort of occupations. Another one is called an architect, where you need to pass certain examination. Then recently, the occupational therapist and the physiotherapist, there may be some of the criteria you need to meet. And another one is audiologist. You can come here as a skilled migrant, but to work as an audiologist, you need to pass certain exams or an internship. So there are many occupations. Even though if you come over here, you need to certainly meet certain criteria, or some occupation you need to clear certain examination before you arrive in Australia to meet that skill migration pathway. So as an immigration firm duly registered in Australia, we can explain you what sort of examination you need to clear, and we can guide you where you can get that support. There are certain organizations who specialized in those sort of examination. You can do certain online training, or some of the examination you must fly to Australia and do the training over here. So as an immigration firm, registered immigration firm in Australia, we can guide you end to end.
What are the problems particularly visa applicants face, and how to choose a migration agent?
Yeah. So there are a lot of misconception around the globe how to find the right immigration firm or a consultant. In Australia and Canada, we are controlled under the government departments. So we got a license from Department of Home Affairs. So we comes under the same department where the visa is getting granted. So we monitored under them and we reporting to them. And how we become a migration consultancy, we all need to be completed an immigration law, and we need to pass a capstone examination, and we get a license from Department of Home Office, the Department of, like the Government of Australia. Same in Canada, IRCCC, they need to get license under the Canadian Migration Department. So majority of our, firms, all of our immigration consultants here, we have around 9 immigration consultants around the Australian cities. Everyone is registered under OMARA, Department of Home Affairs. So we all are licensed one. How we can find an OMARA consultant or a IRCC consultant? You can just search Australian immigration website or a Canadian immigration website, and you can choose your city, you can choose your firm name, then they will show you your licenses, our numbers, whether it is active, whether you have any restriction or anything, you can find it from their official website. So if you're choosing to migrate to Australia or Canada, only select an Australian or a Canadian government approved immigration firms where your the migration journey can be a bit smoother than a non-migration or non-registered agents around the globe.
So what countries are you providing service to? Like, Asset Migration is a bigger firm.
Yeah.
So where are you located and what are the countries that you service?
Yeah. So as an asset immigration firm, we located mainly in Australia, but we do have offices in Canada where the Canadian counterparts look after those parts. But we do have global offices, like in Africa, we have in Zambia, we have Dubai offices cater the Middle East. India, we have 4 offices. So we do have a global presence, and that includes UK and Ireland. Asset migration, it's a regional specialist. We always known as a regional specialist, where we specialized in certain visas called DAMA, labor agreements, where, a lot of, for example, a carer can be migrated to Australia if their employer wish to do that. A cab driver, like a taxi driver and a truck driver, can migrate to Australia if employer of regional employer wish to sponsor them. So we specialized in those areas. Also, we specialized in regional migration like 491, 494, those visas. So that's what we are. We have a great regional presence in Northern Territory. We have offices in Perth, and we have offices in the regional parts of Australia around the globe. There are critical differences between employer sponsorship and state sponsorship. State sponsorship require your occupation on the state occupation list, where an employer sponsorship require that position should be available in his business, and he couldn't recruit an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident. So it is normal in regional Australia. They couldn't find a right employee for a longer term benefits or a longer term the need of the business. So if they can't find an equivalent Australian employee in that region, the Australian government allow them to recruit people from overseas, and they need to advertise the position to say that there's no equivalent Australian workers. Then they could find an international candidate. Then they propose, like they nominate them to be come to Australia. Once the Australian government approve that nomination, that employee can come to Australia, through that visa category, and they can come and work for the employer. They can only work for that particular employer, and if that's employer's choice, if they wanted to nominate him for permanent residency, there is a pathway for them to get a permanent residency to the employer.
So when we talk about employer sponsored, so they have to work with them because they sponsor them.
Yep.
If there is an issue arises, if there's a conflict of the employer is abusing the employee, what are the protections?
Yep. Every Australian workers have a full protection from the law prescribing in Australia. So there are unions available, there are ombudsmen available. So in case if your employer is utilizing you, like in abusing you in the way, like with less wage or anything like that, you can always connect with those government departments. There will be support available for you. With current government, they even give you 6 months. You can work with any employers if you wish to come out from the employer, and you can find a new employer within that 6 months time in Australia, and you can move easily into the new employer. So basically the exploitation won't be tolerated in Australia, and if you've been into that things, you can connect the nearby the bodies like ombudsman or the union to get help out of that.
Now, I want to ask you a very important question. So these days, because of AI and ChatGPT, everything. So how does this differ? Because people might go there and say, "Hey, I know this information," but there might be a policy change or whatever has happened.
Yeah.
So how does the migration firm and whatever the ChatGPT says differs from?
Yeah. So there's an interesting question about ChatGPT and migration law. ChatGPT only can feed from a Google advertisements or the articles we put generally in Google. And always they give the footnote of where they get the information. You're never going to see that immigration law book copied into a ChatGPT and they get an answer from that. The policy always changes in the immigration industry. Even, definitely ChatGPT is a good tool for, a baseline information, and you can always use that. But when it comes to immigration law and the practice, we never suggest ChatGPT as a solid answer for many of your questions, because many times they don't get feeded the right information and the new changes into the chat system. So it is critical to understand, a country's law system is a bit different to what publicly available, unless there is a person who qualified to understand and explain that in a manner where whether you can use it in the right way or not, then you may be in trouble.
If you're considering migrating to Australia, scan the QR code on your screen or use the link in the description below to submit an enquiry. A registered migration agent will review your enquiry and contact you to discuss your eligibility and available migration options. Thank you for watching Nations Watch. Subscribe for more interviews and insights on migration and visas.